Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Brian Meredith and welcome to another Class 4 Battlefield Podcast YouTube quick comment. With the verdict of George Zimmerman now in, I've seen a lot of discussion on television, on the internet, on podcasts about the idea of racism. And I figured that I would throw my little 2 cents in because the reality is, it's amazing that nobody seems to get what racism actually is. There is a way of defining it. Now, back in the 60s and the 50s, the people being called racists were the Ku Klux Klan and the individuals who kept the system of Jim Crow intact. That actually is a racist. What then is Jim Crow, or was Jim Crow? Jim Crow, of course, were laws that were institutionalized that were meant to keep black people inferior, that were meant to keep them in an inferior status. It was meant to keep them inferior from an educational standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. No matter what people could do in the South, it was likely that they were going to always remain inferior. This is what racism is. It's not a word. It's not somebody saying the word cracker. It's not somebody saying the word nigger. It's all about intent. And whether or not the person means, and this could also be subconsciously, there's a lot of subconscious racism that goes on, but whether or not the person means to actually hold the person back, or if it means to suppress the person. Racism, the chief word being race, is about stopping a person from progressing forward, knowingly or unknowingly. Now, when we think about race, we think about color, but that's not the only actual definition of race. Race has become synonymous with color because of, well, some arguments that were made back in the 1800s, basically, looking at various continents and various people as different races instead of different ethnicities. What was proposed back in the 1800s was that there was this grand competition going on between the different ethnicities on the planet, and it was the job of white folks, Europeans back then, to take all of these other misguided ethnicities and help them to rise up to the standard of these Europeans or white people. It was also deemed equally as significant to keep them from reaching the same height as those white folks. That was the racism. That was saying, okay, we're going to stop your progression forward. We know that there's a competition going on, but we are going to make it impossible for you to actually compete with us on a fair level and on a fair ground. Now, this isn't difficult to see, it's not difficult to prove. When you think about education, we often talk about the problems of the inner city. One of the suggestions that were made back in the 70s and 80s were, well, in the inner cities where it's predominantly black, why don't you just teach them more things about black history? Why don't you teach them about their black ancestry? Generally, European Americans said, no, this is ethnocentric. This is wrong. This is reverse racism. It wasn't, actually, in reality, they were right. It was reverse racism in this manner. It was saying, you know something, we know that we've been kept ignorant about our people because doing that kept us feeling inferior. We are now saying we are no longer going to accept that. We are reversing that racism and we are changing it. We are not any longer abiding by it. So yes, it was reverse racism in the sense that it was destroying it. That is what real reverse racism is. That's what it's always been. Black people do not have the power to actually be reverse racists, or even racists in general, unless you're talking about against Hispanics. Now, there's some complexities there. when it comes to politicians and things. But on a general level, racism is about stopping a person from progressing forward. That's what it's always been about, and that's what it is about now. What most people think racism actually is an act. Now, when somebody like George Zimmerman shoots Trayvon Martin, people automatically say, oh, racist, 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 racist. His act alone was not a racist act. However, there has been some discussion about the stand your ground laws and whether or not it was going to negatively impact blacks. The law itself could be seen as racist. The law itself could be seen as racist. It's institutionalized. It could be seen as a form of racism. It could be. I'm not saying that it is. So please don't write comments suggesting that I just did. Now, George Zimmerman did say on video, he said fucking coon. That is not the words of somebody who wasn't profiling an individual because of their color. Forget about if Trayvon Martin had a phone full of pictures of him fighting, if he had a phone with him holding a gun, if he had a phone of marijuana plants. George Zimmerman didn't know that. He was profiling him because of his color. Now, that still doesn't make him a racist. Now, if he shot him because he thought that Trayvon Martin was going to get away, or if he thought that Trayvon Martin was a bigger threat than he was because of his color, that still isn't racist. That's discriminatory, yes. That's bigoted, yes, but it's still not racist. Now, George Zimmerman was acting as a member of a neighborhood community watch group. That alone does not say that he was racist. Now, we could prove that that community watch group was targeting blacks and browns, then that indeed would make him a racist. This individual action, his individual action, does not make him a racist. Does it make him a bigot? Yes. Does it make him a prejudiced man? Yes. But it doesn't make him a racist. Sooner or later, European Americans are going to have to understand it is a system. It's a systematic problem. And the reason why so many brothers and sisters, black brothers and sisters, African American brothers and sisters are so angry about such things as George Zimmerman is because when we do try to explain to you the complexity of racism, when we try to explain to you that it is institutionalized and that we would hope that you would do something about it, you tell us that we are wrong and you tell us that we don't know anything, and if we would just let it go, it would disappear. George Zimmerman, therefore, represents our frustration, and George Zimmerman represents racism in the institution going too far. At least that's how I view it. We view the problem of George Zimmerman as systematic. That if the system would deal with the problem of institutionalized racism, then we wouldn't have to worry about so many vigilantes like George Zimmerman going after blacks and browns and shooting us by accident while using racial slurs. This is racism. Most people don't look at it this way because they don't analyze it. But it is racism. George Zimmerman is just a symptom. He's not the actual freaking disease. And I wish people would realize that. Get at the heart of the disease. And it still exists. Just because we have a half black, half white man in the White House doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Indeed, it means it's gone underground even more. If Obama appoints a black or African American to a high post outside of, not even one person, let's say out of the number of people he appointed, 500 of them happen to be black, brown, or red, or even yellow, and he appoints 700 people. don't you maybe think that people would look and go, wow, you know something, he's pointing a lot of black people, a lot of brown people, a lot of yellow people, a lot of red people. There's a problem with that. Isn't that discriminatory? Isn't that racist? You might have a good charge for that. However, if it was reversed and it was a white president, and the white president placed 500 out of 700 people into office and they were all white, we wouldn't think two bones about that. I'm bringing it up to show you, you know, we don't, or at least a lot of European Americans, they don't appreciate the hypocrisy of how they view race and how they view ethnicity, and how even, you know, you get sick of our calling racism. Trust me. I get sick of people telling me that it's all in my head, that it's reverse discrimination, that it's reverse racism. Like I tell people, I know there's reverse discrimination, but it's not reverse discrimination. It is just discrimination. I know there's bigoted black people. I know there's prejudiced black people. But in this country, and even in this world, we don't hold the power yet to be racist. We don't hold that power yet. And indeed, the times, well, currently notwithstanding, because a lot of the black politicians are just tools. But before we became fragmented, when we held offices, we tended to do well by all people. Now we have a bunch of Uncle Toms in office, so you know we're pretty much on par now. But I want to thank you for listening. Sorry for the sweat. It's stifling here in Western New York. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could write to me at classwarbattlefield@live.com. Again, thank you for listening. This is Vladimir Deese. Peace. Stay cool.